Welcome to Talent Matters, the talent management podcast from PSI. We are the world's leading talent experts, working with clients across the globe to screen, select, develop and engage, delivering over 30 million assessments every year. The world of work is changing at an increasingly rapid pace, and we want to share our leading insight to discuss the main challenges organisations are facing in 2021. In our first series, we will focus on assessment and selection in the reshaped world of work, inviting our guests to talk about their real-world talent challenges and how they have overcome them. Our aim is always to focus on practical takeaways for you. So thank you for listening. Hello and welcome to the second Talent Matters podcast by PSI. And today I'm really pleased to be joined by Claire Harper from EDF. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really pleased to join.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your role at EDF.
So I'm senior manager in coaching and assessment, and really focusing in the talent team. Now, one part of my role focuses around coaching and EDF across the UK, and that's kind of individual, executive level, team level coaching. And the other side, probably more pertinent to today, is around assessment. So predominantly focusing on leadership assessment, and really working with you then in terms of the virtual space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And we're quite new, I guess, quite early in our relationship. We started working with EDF in 2020. Great year to start working with a new client in an interesting environment. And we're working with you on looking at leadership assessment and development centres, something which you would have obviously previously have done face-to-face. And for obvious reasons, we had to think quite quickly about how we were then going to support you with delivering those in a virtual environment. So just tell us a little bit about the reaction to that then internally and that move to moving to a virtual environment.
I think it's quite an interesting one because we've historically always done assessment development centres. They've always been face-to-face. And I don't think we were there culturally to be able to say, oh, yeah, let's switch without a good reason, really. And I think there was this big perception of, well, we've got to continue to do them face-to-face. But obviously last year, the world fell over and we had to do things slightly differently. And we had to, I think once everyone had got over the whole, well, it's not going to be a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It's actually, we're going to have to really think of a different approach for it. And so we've really had to adapt. And I think if we want to continue to run these assessment development centres, we're going to have to change. And for me, this is a real catalyst to say, well, we can really start to approach things quite differently here, really start to have conversations with yourself about what this could look like, what it could feel like, which progressed to you know what, we're going to do this virtually. So let's think about what this would look like. And some of the things we were really quite careful to do was to actively involve people from the business really quite early on to get their thoughts, their feedback. How does it look? How does it feel? What do you think the perception is going to be like for people to go through it? But I think one of the big things being that actually by now everyone is so used to working remotely that when I turn around and say, oh, well, it's going to be remote, it's going to be this virtual assessment, it's not a surprise. Everyone's quite used to it. And it almost feels like, well, why wouldn't it be? And actually, it's almost become a bit more of a natural process instead.
Yeah, it's so funny, isn't it, looking back to, say, 2019. And, I think all of us have been involved in assessment and development centres. And, they would obviously be running either client sites or hotels or, always face-to-face. And the idea was always there of moving to kind of a digital platform or a virtual platform. And it was too complicated a challenge to work out. And, would you get as much of a realistic experience? How would we work that out? Oh, isn't it a shame you're not going to kind of get that networking opportunity, and particularly with leaders who are involved in this kind of thing. And so it just felt like a stretch too far. And, it sounds awful to say that there have been benefits gained from COVID, but, this is one of those benefits in that now working in this virtual space is very much around it's normal, like you say, it's day to day, it's what we're doing, it is a very realistic experience. And so I suppose I want to sort of bust that myth and talk about your experience of this around moving from what would have been previously a face-to-face or paper-based, if you like, assessment development process to a virtual platform. Because I guess the thought is that's a simple process. You just put everything online, everything that you had in paper-based materials, you then put online, copy and paste, and away you go. And of course, it's so much more than that. It's from that end-to-end engagement of either a candidate through a selection process, or in your case, leadership development, and really onboarding that person, making sure they're aware of all of that end-to-end process, what's going to be involved, how much time commitment, have they got access to the right technology. So that whole participant experience is so important. So just really want to get your views on that and your reflections, and I guess what surprised you about moving to that virtual environment.
I think more than anything else, I think it's been really pleasantly surprised is the reality of it, because I think there was almost, as you say, the perception of, well, we'll just do the exercise online, and how's that going to look and feel? But by really using integrated system is meant that it's a lot more intuitive, it's a lot more immersive as well. And whilst it shouldn't become a surprise, because in reality everyone receives briefs by email in the, I suppose, in the real world outside
Yeah,
of an assessment development context, actually it's a real feeling of, well, actually, you know what, this is a lot more realistic, because I wouldn't be handed a printed piece of paper with a particular brief on and
sure.
have to manually look through everything. And so actually it is a lot more, and it becomes a lot more immersive. And I think there's almost at the close at the end of the day where I say to people, right, well, you're back to reality now, and we're out of this fictional company that we've put you in. I think they almost seem a bit reluctant all of a sudden to step away from it and go, oh, but hang on, I've invested myself in this
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
And so I think actually, as you quite rightly say, it's not just taking the exercises that you've got and put them onto a platform, but really working with you to design the exercises up to think about, right, how would this actually look and feel on an online platform? How can we have new emails coming in? How can we have that as part of the process? I think has really been key. And I think one of the other pieces of feedback we've had, certainly in terms of the pleasantly surprised, is that one of the comments I got quite early on of, well, we're going to lose a lot of the non-verbal cues by having it online, because we're not going to be in the room, we're not going to be able to see their facial reflections or the body language. But in reality, if you're in a group assessing a group exercise, for example, you're all crammed into a room and you're
Yeah.
trying to see the person you're assessing. You can't quite see them, and without making it
Mm.
obvious. But actually, in a virtual environment, when you've got the cameras on, you really can still see this. And it's something that you really can still observe all of these non-verbal cues. So I think it takes away almost that worry of it as well, because yes, you know what, it is different, and it is having people to adapt. But because actually a lot of the world have gone remote and people are quite used to working in a Teams environment, it is a lot more easier to navigate. And actually people are a lot used to having that as well. So it's made almost a pleasant surprise, really, in terms of it's become that really intuitive system that's been really quite easy to use.
And that's great to hear. And I suppose we should share with the listeners around what that kind of solution looks like. So it's a virtual immersive assessment and development centre, which comprises an email inbox. So as you said, realistic immersive scenario of lots of emails coming through throughout the day, and then that's interspersed with various meetings, either with peers or line managers or direct reports, just to simulate that real world working environment where participants are given a brief and they're told to prepare for that meeting. The meetings are in the calendar, as would be in our normal working environment now, and they log on to a different meeting, have that discussion, and then return to their email inbox and prepare for their other meetings. So what would you say then have been some of the benefits to you as an organisation of moving to this virtual platform?
So I think there's a few actually, is the reality. I think one element that we can't ignore is it has allowed us to continue. It's meant that throughout over the past year, we've not just had to stop things completely. We've adjusted them, but it's meant that we've been able to really continue. We haven't had to put anything on hold, and we've really been able to progress with individuals. And I think really working with them closely in terms of what it's going to look and feel differently, but actually allowed us to keep going. But in addition to that, there's a number of other factors that we've really seen as some of the benefits. For example, in terms of the travel, as you said, that it's historically in a hotel on client sites, and realistically, most of our assessment development centres take place in the southwest of the UK. So we don't have people travelling down and having to factor in the different travel time as well. And we've had a number of people from different countries still being able to join us, which of course over the past year wouldn't have been able to happen without quarantine. So allowing us to have this geographical connection has been really important. But also I think from a sustainability perspective, so there's far less printing that we'd have to do. And again, in terms of some of the realism, in terms of the exercises, it's really come across from those almost quite logistical perspectives as well that have really allowed us to really think about some of the benefits that we've been able to get from it, but also from the experience of those going through it, is that it's still been able to feel quite real. It's still been able not only happen, but it's been able to feel quite plausible that actually, you know what, if we're looking to assess for potential, we've still been able to really capture that going through from a candidate experience as well.
If this discussion is making you think about how you can run realistic, efficient, and flexible assessments online, you might be interested to hear more about Virtual AC. Virtual AC simulates an online desktop environment, enabling you to deliver highly immersive and interactive business simulation exercises to select and develop your staff. It is an efficient and flexible way to run assessments, using a streamlined online marking system to cut down assessor marking time, while making it convenient for candidates and assessors based in different locations and enabling a globally consistent process. We have a wide choice of ready-to-use exercises covering a range of levels and competencies, including analysis, day in the life, and inbox exercises. Virtual AC is a completely flexible software-as-a-service platform, so alternatively we can work with you to develop and upload a customised or completely bespoke exercise tailored to your needs. Or if you have your own exercises, Virtual AC can host these too. To arrange a demo or to browse our assessment catalogue, head over to psionline.com/talent. I think, you touched on some of the key things that we hear, in terms of benefits from our clients, the logistical, the efficiencies around setup, getting all the people into one location is no longer an issue. Everything that came with that around travel and hotels, the expense of that, of course, is dramatically reduced. But that realistic working environment as well. But I think that the real important point that I wanted to pull out there was around that accessibility and that reach, being able to involve many more people than perhaps you might have done previously, because location or timing or whatever it happened to be would have been prohibitive. So just for global organisations thinking about using a virtual platform, just that access to a wider audience, and particularly for potential, is fantastic. I'm interested to hear in terms of feedback from the participants then. So obviously as an organisation this has been a positive move for you, but participants going through it, how have they found that, kind of pros and cons of going through that process?
So starting with the pros, generally the feedback's been really quite positive. I think we've had to be careful to think about where we're going to be building the breaks in throughout the day to make sure that it's not lots of screen time and they've got a chance to step away. And if they're not working on an exercise that's an interactive component, then obviously we've not got the cameras on, so it's not a camera watching them all the time of the day. But on a whole, actually, it has been really quite positive feedback from the participants. I think at the end of one of our first sessions that we ran, the comment was, "Well, I'm quite tired, but no more than I would have been if it was face to face," because obviously the
Yeah,
nature of them, it is going to be quite intense. So we're
of
not going to
course.
be able to step away from that. But I think it's actually seemingly they've taken it all in their stride. They've recognised, you know what, some people might still prefer face to face, but the feedback on a whole is, I wasn't sure about it to begin with, but having gone through it, yeah, actually, I really rate it. It's really been well received. But I think it's also things that actually we've also got to think about where, for example, we've had a few more questions from people. So it might be people have said, well, I don't know what to wear. What do I wear for this if it's a virtual environment?
Yeah,
Because it's something that's really quite different in terms of, well, actually, it's not face to face. So how does that
yeah.
interplay with it? I think one of the cons and something that we've had to actively think about is that normally in assessment and development scenario, we also get a lot of networking. And that might be as a byproduct where they have downtime in the breaks, where actually they were interacting with people who they wouldn't otherwise know from across the organisation. And we've not had that. So we've
Of
had to
course.
actively think about how we can include some of the networking and really thinking about how we can build a bit more of a community on the back of this as well. And it's not a bad thing. I think that's some real positives in terms of the active steps afterwards. But I think we are mindful that that is something we've got to. I think we've got to really think about how we do and think about how we can still get the most out of it, because that's one of the byproducts of a typical face-to-face assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, not only with other participants, but often some of the senior stakeholders that are involved, either assessing or, just present at something like that normally, missing that opportunity is something we hear from clients around how do you emulate that in a virtual environment, starting to think about, can you get that same value from, just as we're talking about with employees, that water cooler conversation, when you're on a break and you start talking to someone, it's really difficult to emulate that in a virtual environment. I totally see that. And, that conversation about what to wear is a great one, isn't it? Because, on the most part, you think great because you're going to be comfortable at home and, you can be in your own environment, wear whatever you want, and that can be comfortable. But for other people, they prefer to, to put the suit on to go to another location because it gets them into the right mindset. So I guess from that perspective, it gives more flexibility for someone to approach that as they would want to and how they feel most comfortable, and therefore would perform at their best. But really interesting consideration. You talked about the some of the senior stakeholders that you had involved there. Interested to see what their feedback's been and their perception of this new setup.
You know what, actually, on a whole, it's been really positive. I think, yes, we can't get away from they'd love to have had the chance to speak to people more informally. But actively, in terms of their involvement, it's been really quite positive because they've been able to, for example, rather than having to go to a particular location and having a certain number of days out of the business, which actually, when they're really quite senior from that respect, can often be hard in terms of the logistics to actually physically get them there. But it's meant that then for the particular exercises that they're observing throughout the day or they're engaging with, then it's well, actually, they only need to dial in for this particular session and can therefore take another call in between, for example, and then dial into another session. And so it's made it a lot more manageable. And actually, as a result of it, there's been a lot more engagement from us, some of our senior leaders, in terms of the active engagement in terms of them being present in the exercises or present in the assessment centre and how we can really engage with them. And again, the feedback being really positive, and again, some positive surprise from them of actually, I
Yeah.
like this, I really like this, I like how it looks and feels, and being really quite excited about the virtual environment as well.
No, that's great to hear. And I think, like you say, COVID's given that catalyst to try something because you wanted to carry on, and there's been some positives from that. And now some things to think about how you can get the best from that virtual environment as you continue to roll these out, but maybe think about some of those elements that would be better face to face. And I think that does reflect reality in the broader world around how are we going to continue with assessment and development centres, most likely in some kind of hybrid way, thinking about the elements like the networking, as we mentioned, that would perhaps be better face to face, or where that money or time would be better spent. So I think that is something we'll be working with a lot of our clients on in the coming months and years. But really, just to finish then, Claire, I'd be really interested to hear your kind of top tips, if you like, for those organisations who might have previously put their assessment activity on hold because of COVID. What top tips would you give about making the most of a virtual assessment environment?
So for me, I think in terms of some of the top tips, the biggest thing I'd say is really go for it. So start to have those conversations about what it could look and feel like. We've talked a lot in terms of actually designing the assessments specifically for the online platform, and for us that's been absolutely key. It's not been simply a case of, well, let's take some exercises and let's put them onto a platform and hope for the best. For us, it's been the actual design to make it this really immersive experience has been really quite positive. We've probably also taken a fair bit more time to really brief people in advance. And although, yes, this was something we did, it's also things such as I've taken screenshots about what the platform would look and feel like. And although your team are really great about really supporting people on the day and having a one-to-one session at the beginning of the new day, actually having those screenshots and taking away some of the mystery of it in advance, that's been something that's really been key because it takes away some of the, oh goodness, I don't quite know what this is going to look and
That
feel like.
fear. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really enabled people to go into it thinking, yeah, I know what this is going to feel like. I know what it's going to be like. And so really almost changing and tilting the balance of some of the briefs of these are the kind of behaviours, yes, that we're going to be looking for, but also this is what it's going to look and feel like, I think for us has been really quite positive there as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Claire. It really helps to bring this to life in terms of a real world case study, and just for our listeners to hear how things have worked for you in reality, rather than us just talking about the benefits. So thank you for sharing all of your experiences. If you would like to hear more about the solutions discussed in today's podcast, or you would like to join a future podcast discussion, please visit psionline.com/talent. Thank you for listening.